Hello everyone, I hope you enjoyed your lunch break. Welcome back to the second half of the Cresting Conference. We have the second Cresting presentations on places and policies. I'd like to very briefly introduce Professor Walter Merlin from the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development at Utrecht University, who was the leader of Work Package 1 in Cresting and will be introducing this session. Thank you, Walter.
It's my pleasure to welcome you again in the afternoon session. This session, we won't have three leading questions, but one very general question. The main question for this afternoon session is, what is the relationship between circular economy, place, and policy? And this brings us to the very concept of circular economy, which can be conceived both at the local, regional level, but also at the national and the international level. This actually links both to the material perspective on circularity in economic systems, but it also links to the governance level. And we will see that what is happening at the local level is also related to what is organized at higher levels, both practically and in terms of institutional arrangements. What we will do during this session is we will start at a macro level, an aggregate level, looking at the conceptions of circular economy, and then we will step by step zoom into the local level. And I'm always stressing that if we want to analyze sustainable development issues like circular economy, it's very essential to zoom in and zoom out constantly and to connect these together. So what is happening at the local level is very much also determined by arrangements at higher levels, and to properly organize policies and approaches on the higher level, it's essential to get informed about what's really happening on the local level and on the business level, which we discussed in this morning. Next slide, please. Next slide. We will move from the aggregate level, looking at the discourses on circular economy presented by Martine Callisto-Friant. Very important is the distinction between a fairly narrow approach of circular economy and a wider, more inclusive conceptualization of it, which was also already discussed partly in the morning. Then we move to the national level, where Kieran Campbell-Johnston will present his work on the national material collection systems and the lessons we can learn from that. After that, we will move to the regional networks. Aidan Newsholm will present work on that, connecting also the city level. And Santiago Perez will present some examples on that type of work. And then we will further zoom into the regional, local, and city level, with Koska Lekan presenting work done at Hull, and Heather Rogers also stressing the work in the recollection of materials and products. And finally, we will move up again in this nice figure to the international level, showing that what is happening at one place on the national level is connected also to what is happening far away in other places on the national level. And that will be presented by Kaustup Thapa. So at this stage, I want to hand over the word to Martine Callisto-Friant.
Hi, thank you, Walter. Basically, I am dealing with the international level, as Walter well explained. And what I found through my research essentially is that the whole discourse of the circular economy, or the circularity transition, if you wish, can be divided in two broad set of different discourses. The first one is on circular economy, the traditional mainstream discourse, which basically is the one that we've been speaking about today, and is related to recycling and cycling and flowing materials and energy resources throughout society in a sustainable manner through different R strategies ranging from R0 to R9 remine, and passing by remanufacturing and refurbishment, repurposing, and etc. So it's the more mainstream traditional view. However, my research found that this does not do justice to the different perceptions of circular society that also exist, and especially the precursive concepts to the circular society, such as the performance economy of Stahel, but also cradle to cradle, small is beautiful, and many other concepts like the steady state economy, which are also seen as circularity concepts, but which have a different approach to circularity that not only seek to cycle material resources, so don't only look at the material side of the equation, but also seek to and address the flows of power, energy, of power, knowledge, and wealth, and thereby also talk about needs of, for example, democratization, redistribution, and citizen participation in the economy. Now, obviously, these, if we can go to the next slide, we can see that the mainstream discourse of circular economy is evidenced by concepts such as biomimicry, industrial metabolism, and industrial ecology, which really much focus on creating this metaphor between industrial systems and natural ecosystems, right? Getting inspirations from nature in order to develop new technologies and innovations. However, now, if you look at circular society discourses, they're much more diverse. Next slide, please. And within them, we see a lot of diversity in terms of both being from the global north and the global south, and also diversity in terms of them being from different academic disciplines. So we see discourses such as degrowth, and the book there, Farewell to Growth, is pretty important for that. We have steady state economics, as I already mentioned. From the global south, we have concepts like Buen Vivir that comes from the Andes mountains and also seeks to create harmonious relationships within and between nature and society. You have Crystal Felber's Economy for the Common Good, for example, The Limits to Growth, Small is Beautiful, but there are many, many more. I'm just showing a very small percentage of what is out there. Next slide. So even though there's a lot of diversity within the landscape of circularity discourses, when it comes to practice, the question is a bit different. And I looked into detail at Circular Economy Action Plan of the European Union, specifically the one of the Juncker Commission. And there was a dichotomy that I found that most of the discursive elements in the policies, and I looked at all the new directives and regulations that were established by the Juncker Commission regarding circular economy, that there was a big talk about social justice, a big talk about participation of citizens, and a lot of talk about cooperation with civil society. But then when you look at the actual policies that are being implemented, it all focuses really on recycling mostly, and to some extent eco-design, but much lesser so. So basically, there's a dichotomy, a difference between the words and the actions that are proposed at the international level, at least by the European Union. And obviously, we need more research to compare, for example, European Union with also US, Chinese, South American, and other African, for example, Middle Eastern perspectives on circularity. Yes, next slide, please. So thus far, throughout my research, I've seen that while 80% of circular economy definitions would fall in a more materialistic, economic, and economist-centric vision of a circular economy, over 70% of academic concepts that are associated with circular economy, such as those that I presented before, but also many others, I've mapped myself around around 75 concepts associated with circularity, and 70% of them are actually pretty much in the circular society aspect. So they also talk about redistributing power, redistributing knowledge, technology, about democratizing society, and therefore cycling money, wealth, and technology in radically distributive and redistributive manners, and not just cycling resources, which is also important. It's not like it's not important to build renewable energy systems and our strategies, but it's definitely not enough. And this academic wealth of knowledge that there is has researched this quite in depth. So there's more plurality, more diversity out there. Next slide, please. Also, it's worth mentioning that in a recent survey, 54% of people, actual people, prefer a circular society-like vision than a circular economy one. So I think what is happening here with this focus on very technocentric propositions that focus on resources and materials alone is that there's a failure of the imagination. There's this idea that there is no alternative to the current economic order, and thereby we only seek to maintain it and keep it running without changing our ways of life and without fundamentally transforming it. And unfortunately, now we know, because of the current state of degradation of the Earth, both in terms of climate change and biodiversity degradation and pollution and etc., and also limitations in terms of material resources, that we cannot maintain the current societal order and still survive on this planet, essentially, or maintain civilized society. So we need to really decolonize the imaginary and realize that, in fact, there are plenty of alternatives, and that literature from the 70s onwards has shown and has developed a plethora of alternatives, from the steady-state economics to degrowth, to buen vivir, to Ubuntu in Africa, ecological Swaraj in India, Gandhian economics, small is beautiful. There are many, many, many to choose from. And they must and shall be necessary elements of a plural, more diverse, more just, and more inclusive vision of a circular future. And now I pass on to my friend and colleague Kieran, which will address in more detail aspects at the national level regarding circular implementation.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kieran Campbell-Johnston. Thank you, Martin, for passing it over. I'm based at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands, and my research looks at existing policies and strategies for CE. So this maybe fits within the kind of more limited understanding of CE that Martin was sketching out before. But the purpose of my PhD really is to look back at the lessons of policies that have in some ways contributed to CE strategies, think about what can we learn from them and where can they be improved to move towards a more integrated transformational idea of CE. You go to the next slide, please. Perfect. So my research very much focuses on one existing policy strategy, extended producer responsibility. Now, this is a key strategy that's been promoted both at the European level, at the Commission level, but also at the member state level. And this instrument as an idea was developed in the late 80s and early 90s and built on the polluter pays principle. So the idea that those who produce pollution should be responsible for dealing with it. And over the last 30 years, it's been manifested in different practices and different product categories, and primarily has resulted in giving producers additional responsibilities. So responsibilities for the post-waste stage, the post-user phase of their product's lifespan. And the intention of this instrument was very much then to reduce the environmental impact resulting from the life cycle of a product. And in many ways, it's promoted a number of what we would call the CER strategies. So some reuse, but primarily collection, recycling, and energy recovery. And the kind of question and intention of my research was, well, to what extent is this instrument really fit to really contribute to the new challenges of CE? We're now dealing with issues of extreme pressures on resources, extreme waste generation. How and what ways do the systems that we have organized actually contribute to CE, and where can they be improved? Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk through two case studies, and I apologize if the quality of the figures isn't super clear, but I'll talk them through. So the first case study that I want to talk through is from research we conducted with partners in Italy. And in an extended producer responsibility system, as I said, producers are given responsibility for the collection and recycling. But in many ways, this is recycling for the sake of recycling. And our concern and our question as well, if we think about issues of resource depletion, do the systems that have been organized, do they actually promote the recovery of the most critical materials, the most geologically scarce? And for this study, we investigated the recycling of electronic products and tried to map the presence, the quantities and losses of these kind of more scarce, these critical materials, ones like lithium, cobalt, antimony. And what we found and what we observed is, whilst they are there in kind of quantities, many of these materials are actually lost. And that the systems and the targets that are pursued in extended producer responsibility policies very much focus on mass collection of recycling, but not so much on the specificity of the materials. So our solution that we are looking to develop is, well, maybe then we can think, because there will always need to be recycling in a circular economy, maybe then it should be more focusing on those materials that are most scarce and most likely to be exhausted. And where we can't recover these materials, this is when things need to feed into questions around product design, to eco-design. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. I want to quickly talk through a second case study we did. We worked with a number of experts and practitioners in the Netherlands in the last year and a half, and we conducted a Delphi study. So we asked expert participants, what is needed to be changed in EPR to better contribute to CE? And we listed their responses and we synthesized the results and developed a white paper on this topic. And one of the key issues that came out from it is that EPR has been very good at focusing on these lower R strategies, so the promotion of collection and recycling, etc. But this more integrated perspective, the R strategies that can actually really contribute to maybe reducing consumption, reuse or refuse, these actors are very much systematically excluded, or they're not integrated in extended producer responsibility systems. So in our white paper, next slide, please. In our white paper, we proposed exactly this. Next slide, please. Thanks. In our white paper, we proposed exactly this. So all these different actors, from repair, reuse, they need to be integrated in the design of these EPR systems. And so it's not just about promoting collection and recycling anymore, but really think about integrating the actors. We talked earlier about the retailers who can very much promote product lifetime extension. Next slide, please. And the one after. There we go, that's the one, perfect. So to quickly wrap this up, so my research is very much focused on EPR as an existing policy strategy. What can we learn from it? And we can see over the past 30 years, yes, it's very much contributed to promoting recycling and collection, but this is not the way forward, as we've been discussing this morning. So I highlighted kind of two key issues that very much need to be kind of pursued and changed to actually make this instrument better contribute to circular economy. The first one is a limited scope. So how we can integrate actors further into EPR systems. And the second one is simply, we need to stop thinking about recycling for the sake of recycling and maybe think about how we can promote recovery of the most scarce materials. I will finish there, I think, and pass on to my colleague, Aidan.
Hello, thank you very much, Kieran. So now I'll moving from the national perspective down to the regional level, circular economy policy and business perspectives. So as you can see here on this map, we talked about Hull in earlier discussions today. So Hull is in the northeast of England, on the north side of the Humber Estuary. So that's the region I'll be looking at today. So I'll be looking at it from both a policy perspective and also a company perspective, specifically manufacturing and logistics companies. So some of the key points I'll present here from my findings through discourse analysis and also through interviews with key policymakers and businesses in the region. So the first point here is to make that at the regional level in the English context, regional policymakers struggle to make circular economy decisions locally, as they have to follow the national regulations in terms of waste management. As you can see here from this quote from Hull City Council and their carbon neutral strategy, they're calling on national government to give them more support to be able to tailor and develop these more regionally tailored initiatives, in this case for carbon neutrality. Another key point then from the EU national and regional level, all policymakers are in agreement that the circular economy has potential to solve some economic challenges and environmental challenges, but the roles for implementation are less clear. So the next slide, please. Yeah, now looking at the company perspective. So businesses, I interviewed businesses in the Humberside region, and they often discuss their circular economy collaborations through supply chain partners. But often these supply chain partners are globally distributed, so they're not just located in the region, they're located all around the world. So that's raising questions in relation to the potential for developing more regionally focused supply chains, and also issues potentially if one company leaves the region and it may disturb a potential regional circular economy collaboration. So this quote here from a company is basically showing how they're looking to go back the stages through the supply chains. And they're also presuming that the supply chain partners are willing to collaborate in terms of developing circular economy initiatives across the scales. And then the final slide, please. Yeah, okay. And then just to bring it together then, the policy versus the company perspective. So policy are calling on the companies to take action in terms of circular economy development at a regional level. Companies, you can see in this quote, haven't really seen the potential for working with the local authorities despite their connection to the region. So they presume it's a business-to-business activity for the circular economy. So future conclusions and recommendations is to explore the potential of sourcing more regionally and developing more alignment between the regional policymakers and the business to develop inclusive circular economies at the regional level. And now I'll pass you on to Santiago at the city level. Thank you.
Yes, hello everybody. So I'm going to talk about the scale of cities. So we've gone from very big policies to very specific policies, I hope, in this presentation. And I'm going to kind of move geographically from Hull to France. So in France is the 2 case studies where I performed my research. I had 2 case studies, one on the east of France in Strasbourg, and one on the west of France in La Rochelle. I'm going to focus more for this presentation on the main case study, which is the one in Strasbourg. So here are like just 2 easy maps to locate physically, geographically, the 2 case studies. I'm going to focus on the one on the right side. It is important to notice here that Strasbourg is a very particular city, as it's placed just there in the border between France and Germany. And they share a massive tradition, a big tradition of commerce on the river. So they have both cities, the city of Kehl and the city of Strasbourg. They have developed big industries that have benefited from the port since the very early 19th century. But it dates from way before that. In Middle Ages, they were doing commerce, they were using the rivers for the same thing. So they have a big tradition of industry and commerce and market using the rivers. So next slide, please. There you go. Wonderful. So what I want to talk to you, and this is related to what we've been talking since Martin, then going to Kieran and Aidan, is about how these policies kind of get into action in a territory. In my case, is the cities. So we have to acknowledge that there are many plans at national and regional level, regional meaning a European level, that set some boundaries for what you can and can't do. And then there are cities and there are regional kind of internal regional standards that they set up and they follow. This is the case, of course, for the city of Strasbourg. So you have different, let's say, action plans towards sustainability, towards zero waste, towards many of the different targets that in France they have been set by the government. But then you have very specific plans for the city. Strasbourg is a very particular city because it has become a Euro metropole. So it has, let's say that the responsibilities of the city of Strasbourg, it extends to at least 26 cities or small villages around Strasbourg. In this way, what I want to say is that these national kind of policies and these national action plans, they get translated into very specific plans. Now, next slide, I'm going to explain how they do that. Thank you. And the importance of that. So what's important to remark here is that during the adaptation of those national plans into a city level, it's very important that all the stakeholders participating in the circular economy, in my very specific case is on industrial ecology projects, they share this common language. So they know what the circular economy is, they know what sustainability is, they know what the plans are at national level. And for that, it's very important that there is clear communication with, like, among all the stakeholders. This means that private sector is crucial for the development of industrial ecology and circular economy strategies. This means that the firms that are participating in industrial symbiosis projects and industrial ecology larger projects, they get to kind of understand what they are talking about. And then once you have everybody on the same table speaking in the same language, what happened, and this is part of the results that I'm getting from my research, is that there are many different scales of action. And those different scales of action are not easy to evaluate and to assess. So we use usually, let's say on a technical way, in a technocentric way, we used to just quantify carbon emissions. We used to justify reduction of water usage and things like that. And we leave aside another set of, let's say, qualities that make circular economy projects or industrial ecology projects very interesting and that can potentially contribute to larger sustainability plans. Very, very important thing. So next slide, please. Very important thing about that is that there is a core, let's say, core values when it comes to translating national policies into city policies. And the local anchoring, the local embeddedness of companies, it plays just a huge role. The generation of identity, it plays a huge role. You care and you do kind of take actions to care the places that you like, where you're coming from, where you do your activities. So this is kind of just very basic, but it's something that we still have not managed to integrate into the assessment and evaluations of circular economy plans. So we're doing that little by little. These are just like kind of three pictures, and these I leave you with these three pictures of kind of city scale results of what's been happening in terms of industrial ecology and circular economy in Strasbourg. The first one on the left side is about merging the two portuary cities of Strasbourg and Kehl, and just proposing kind of a multinational, because it's Germany and France, a bilateral kind of plan for sustainability. Then the one in the middle, it's kind of the physical results of the industrial ecology activity in Strasbourg, which it might seem marginal, but the important thing about those results is that those results, they inspire to larger actions towards sustainability. And then the third one is just how people transform the place. And as soon as they transform the place into something that they like the city, we're talking about city level, they will care about it. And then the motivations and all the local embeddedness can be played out to further development of sustainability. So I'll leave you with Goske Lekken, which is in the room. Yes.
I don't know, is the camera on or not? I don't know. Oh, it is. Okay. Hello, everyone. So I'm Goska, it's a short form of Małgorzata, which is a full name. So the slides are not on yet, so I'm going to wait. Okay, so here we go. So in my research, I have proposed a more holistic approach to the circular economy, which recognizes the role of mission-driven social enterprises and their networks in helping to harness socio-ecological premises of circular economy thinking and practice at the city level and also local scale. And this is what we mean by company level, local communities, and neighborhoods. So social enterprises are not defined by their legal status, but by their social and/or environmental missions, aims, and outcomes, and the way they redistribute the profits they generate for their trading activities. So I adopted 50 case study social enterprises from 3 different locations, as you can see in the map, and across multiple sectors, so like such as food, wood, textiles, hygiene, detergents. So the dominant forms of social enterprises concern charities with a trading arm, social benefit enterprises, social purpose businesses, including family-run enterprises and solo traders, including, for example, owners of zero-waste shops. Next slide, please. So I extended the concept of diverse economies to encompass diverse circular economies and show cities as places with many alternative activities that offer new local economic development trajectories. So they involve both monetary and non-monetary transactions, purely capitalist and non-capitalist characteristics, and diverse relations. So the curved arrows beneath the surface depict reuse, repair, refurbishment, remanufacture, recycling, and recovery of resources. So basically circular economy principles. So there are also outflows of surplus of waste from the mainstream economic sphere, as you may want to call this way, to social enterprises for revalorization. So there might be also minor inflows from alternative to mainstream economic spaces in case of business-to-business transactions, B2B. So for example, a large corporation may want to transfer some items such as no longer in-use jackets to social enterprises for upcycling into bags for corporate employees. So these transactions further reproduce interdependencies between the 2 economic spheres, the mainstream and the not-so-mainstream alternative economic sphere, and they slow down material cycling whilst protecting the quality of people's lives. However, they don't resolve any larger social problems at any substantial scale level. Next slide, please. So we can observe how the so-called local to global circuits of value are being formed around circular social enterprise activities. Understanding them can help to better explain feedback loops across the coexisting mainstream and also mainstream economic spaces of production, exchange, and consumption. So findings reveal that material inputs circulate through global production networks. So now we have this reference to this global scale. And therefore they embody contestable social and environmental footprints. And some of such practices also contribute to greenwashing and enable private companies to obtain cheap services. So for this reason, social enterprises may feel as if they were being exploited by large corporations that may use them as a way, for example, to lower their waste management fees, for example, by upcycling wooden pallets. So some of the social enterprises may also be portrayed as a substitute for welfare services. So this has impact on scaling circular economy activities as public authorities have different ideas on how to allocate available money each year. And also findings show that basically social enterprise-driven local economic development is little more than joining of some parts of circuits of value in such a fashion that they enhance local circular economy activity rather than they stimulate local economic development in a broad sense. So interestingly, one policymaker from the Whole City Council noted that they will actually be into exploring the wider strategic circular economy opportunities regionally. So now we have this reference to the regional level. So meaning across the, for example, Yorkshire and Humberside region, and then so they will be interested in starting to build and develop those strategically. So also when scaling impacts, it's also important to recognize the role of digital technologies. So there is, however, you need to find financial means to support the development of alternative digital platforms that are not owned by large corporations, so that productive capital and control is widely basically distributed to individuals within society. And And also to scale impacts, of course, it's important to enable a space for collaborative arrangements between social enterprises, private sector, and public authorities. So, for example, for the social public procurement practices and working with municipal waste recycling centers from which social enterprises can capture potentially reusable items before they are being sold to, I don't know, global south or they are being incinerated. And also it's important to foster these collaborations at all levels mentioned basically in this session. So the resultant networks then can boost resource flows and ideally helping to improve, decentralize, integrate and intertwine existing recycling infrastructure with built infrastructure, financial capital, social and human capital, circular creativity, tools, knowledge, and social needs, and so on. And also social enterprises should be also recognized as important reuse operators, enabling private companies to implement the already mentioned by Kieran extended producers responsibility EPR schemes, which should shift focus from recycling to reuse. So as those EPR schemes would oblige producers to pay a levy on new products within the scheme, it would be then possible to create national funds to support a social enterprise-led circular economy activities. Next slide, please, the last one. So network building is very important in enabling to diversify and benefit producers or prosumers of respective circular products. Here in the figure, you can see such building blocks or components of such networks. So for example, some social enterprises engage in furniture upcycling, provide mental health supports, also by employing prisoners or formerly homeless people. And income from such ventures may be then reinvested, for example, in hospices. So basically everyone feels valuable, is contributing to something. And there are, however, many internal and external challenges to overcome when it comes to ensuring the viability of such initiatives, and especially networking. So this can occur at the enterprise level, for example, in terms of management structures, liability of newness, smallness, different capabilities like leadership, even age of entrepreneurs. There are many different factors affecting all of this. And also at the city level. So it's the challenges, for example, to find market for some of the circular items that may be actually expensive. The upcycling items can be actually expensive as well. And regional level. So for example, there may be inability among local authorities to collaborate on a regional level, which may then have implications for the redistribution of funding. So for example, at the Humberside region, it's pretty, less developed than, I don't know, this surroundings of York City. So this is the idea there would be to collaborate and kind of redistribute it more equally. So while entrepreneurs should be encouraged to foster a collaborative environment to jointly confront competitive mainstream market forces, collaborating is time-consuming. And even if social enterprises would like to collaborate, they don't have enough funds to hire others to do networking. And many social enterprises also tend to compete with others for funding, but not so much for the resources because there's so much waste out there. And also some more established social enterprises are better in writing winning big, so there's lots of power relations like inequality also among their organizations. So it's in a way like a catch-22 situation. But also many enterprises, they don't want to rely on funding, which is great because of course it's better to be autonomous, but to get there is of course paid with many obstacles. So finding good brokers and external organizations that could provide capacity building schemes is a starting point to address these issues. So funders should also require social enterprises to make their circularity evident also in order to obtain support. So overall, just to highlight, just finish it. So although the social enterprises are small and they don't change capitalist organizations' business models, they offer, new employment opportunities and boost local actors' confidence to demand change, basically by providing new markets for sustainable products. Okay, I'm gonna now introduce Heather. I mean, you're gonna introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kafka. Hi, everybody. I'm Heather. So my research has been primarily looking at employment in the circular economy. So today I'm going to talk a bit about the local employment implications of the transition. This is just a little bit of background. So a lot of studies have tried to quantify the job creation in circular economy. And the consensus is really that there will be a net increase in jobs, although there'll be some redistribution as well. One thing to note here, though, is that a lot of studies have focused on quantification. More recently, there's been a call for more qualitative research in this area, and that's what my research is trying to address. Next slide, please. So my research looked at the repair economy. There's a number of reasons that we did this. One is that repair is often cited as a main mid-skill level job creation opportunity. Also environmentally, narrowing product loops is very important. On the other hand, though, there's also a lot of social benefits that go along with the repair economy. So things like affordability and access, but also skills training, particularly for people who might have employment barriers and need some assistance in re-engaging with society and the workforce. Next slide. So I'll just focus on two pieces of my research. One was looking at demand for repair services, and the other is quality of work. Next slide. So when we looked at demand, we did a public survey with Hull City Council that looked at demand for repair services, also willingness to participate, some barriers, and also tried to develop a participant profile because we know that targeting certain demographic groups is a key factor in reaching a critical mass for participation. Next slide. So these were the two most cited barriers, cost of repair and low replacement cost of products. It's not really surprising, but what I want to note here is that although these barriers are felt at a local level, they're very dependent on national and international landscapes. So arguably the most effective way to address these barriers is through structural interventions like tax redistribution or design regulation subsidies. And those are very difficult things for local actors to influence. Next slide, please. We also tried to develop this participant profile, and there were a number of patterns that emerged. One that I'll just touch on briefly was the role of gender. It's kind of unfortunate, really, but we found that traditional gender roles were significant in the determination of participation in the repair economy, particularly for do-it-yourself repair. And so this is, rather than maybe a question of governance scale, this is more of a question of cultural values in society, and is maybe a more difficult question to answer about where influence might be in that area. Next slide, please. So moving on to quality of work, drawing some information for this on some interviews that I did with small third-party repair shops. So these were shops in a number of different product categories, but independent third-party repair and quite small, so under 5 employees. We looked at a number of different aspects of quality of working life. This one relates to influence. So we found that while in theory, owners have complete control over their work environment, that actually they're subject to all of these other external conditions like market conditions and regulations, also things like their own household financial security, their own capacity, and that actually decisions are often made out of necessity or desperation. Next slide, please. In terms of skills, employers more often than not said that they valued experience and natural aptitude over formal training in their employees. In their own skill set, it seemed that managerial skills or business development skills, or the lack thereof, were often the limiting factor in the success of their business. And there was very little time left for capacity building in these areas. Next slide, please. So we can say that barriers to expansion of third-party repair limit its potential to provide quality employment opportunities at the local level. So for this sector to expand, actually multi-level intervention is required to capture benefits locally. Next slide, please. So I have talked a lot about barriers and sort of limitations to job creation, but as I mentioned in the first slide, the repair economy is about more than just job creation. So I wanted to end on a bit of a positive note and talk about some of the volunteer repair services that exist. So things like repair cafes. They're providing really valuable social spaces, skill sharing spaces in communities. And we see in Hull, at least, that there's a really unique opportunity for intergenerational connection and combating things like isolation and loneliness. So these intangibles are hard to measure, and they're often coming from a grassroots level, but they also can be influenced by, they can also be influenced by different spatial and governance scales as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Casto, who I think is going to finish off with a discussion on the international scale again.
Thank you, Heather, for your presentation. So my research looks at the international dimension of circular economy. Primarily, I follow the waste from Europe to other parts, Nigeria, and also Southeast Asia, and connect the dots between European circularity and the implications to sustainability by looking at the waste products. And I've come to a conclusion that there's a need for more push towards the just society, towards a more circular society idea. Just transitioning. Next slide, please. So the problem that my research kind of tries to deal is the hole in the European circular economy. As we all know, the circular economy has been adopted in Europe since 2015 at a policy level. But if you look closely, you see waste moving outside of Europe to other countries, secondhand products moving outside to other countries. It not only signifies loss of resources, but also a lot of people, scholars and NGO community question if this flow of waste or secondhand items to other countries is fair. Is it just? Is it a way to export harm? And in this context, I also question myself and with my stakeholders, can we at least try to solve this? Is there a solution to this problem? Next slide, please. And to create solution, I take a more transdisciplinary approach, which means that the research is done with society, with different stakeholders, mostly in the Nigerian context. And I briefly divide my research process into 4 different stages. And the first stage, obviously, is the initial stage where a bunch of scholars came together and applied for the funding for this project, which enabled us and other 14 ESRs to carry out our work. So that was the first. It was done even before I was hired as a PhD to do my research. Then when I took the position, one of the first things I did was I went to a month-long trip to Nigeria, mostly to get to know people, get to understand the local context, did a lot of field work, interviews, observation. So this whole process was relationship building. And it led to the second point. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, it had to be completely online, but we also wanted to know the problem, the systematic understanding of the problem. And for that, the local knowledge was extremely essential for us. So in the second phase, we did online Delphi survey and also 3 different workshops to identify the problem, but also come up with specific solution in terms of who are the actors involved and what the actors can do in order to kind of solve this issue. And the last phase, which is ongoing right now, it's quite a long research already. It's been more than 18 months. And now we are taking the solutions and we want to take the solutions to the Nigerian government and also to the European Parliament to say, we have identified some problems and we have also come up with some solutions, and maybe it's time to implement this towards making European circular economy transition more just, more inclusive and more fair. For this, we are doing a petition, maybe after this conference that's open for public from all over the world, and then take the petition with all the support to the European level and the Nigerian government. Next slide, please. So one of the problems, quickly I want to go through is there's a big demand of secondhand products in Nigeria. So this demand obviously attracts a lot of shipment of European secondhand items, which we think, oh, it's nice. At least secondhand items are being reused somewhere else. But if you look deeply, then about 1/3 of the products that go to Nigeria do not work. So they're basically e-waste, which are being transported as secondhand products, which is illegal to do. We also see that a lot of secondhand products, they don't last too long, which is counterintuitive if we are talking about circular economy transition. We also noticed that there's a lot of circular practices already established in Nigeria, like reselling, reusing, refurbishing, selling components to repair something else, but these are mostly conducted by the informal sector. And one of the big problems is doing this can lead to harm because electronic waste can be quite toxic and can harm humans and the environment and the planet. Next slide, please. So how do we close the hole in the European circular economy? So one of the things we looked at is in Europe, when you buy a product, the producers are made responsible to take care of the product. But what happens right now is the system, the extended producer responsibility system, does not really factor in when products are used for multiple cycles in different geographies. For instance, if I buy a phone in the Netherlands and it ends up in Nigeria, the producer or the importer in Netherlands is out of responsibility. So what we propose from this co-creative exercise with 24 different experts in Nigeria is the idea that the extended producer responsibility should be extended to other parts of the world as well if European secondhand items go to other parts. So we call it more holistic, more ultimate producer responsibility. And obviously it is driven by fairness, driven by inclusive, and it's also built on international solidarity. And it actually retains value and the value of the product for as long as possible. So that's the solution to the problem I showed you before. With this, I give the floor back to Dr. Walter Vermeulen to kind of summarize the presentation. Thank you. Walter?
Yes, I'm still, yeah, I still saw Kaustup. Well, thank you all 7 PhDs, Kaustup, Heather, Koska, Santiago, Aidan, Kieran and Martin for your presentations. At this stage, Pauline Deutsch and me will give some general reflections on the work just presented. One of the first points is we started with that, of course, that circular economy actually exists on across various scales. And we've seen these presentations, we've seen on the global scale that we're not just talking about a single circle of product use, but we see multiple circles where after collection, reuse may take place, partly within Europe, but ultimately in quite some cases outside Europe in lower income countries. At the national level, we see a dominance of these extended producer responsibility schemes, which have been implemented under what we call Circular Economy 2.0, the 1990s and after 2000 approaches. And we see that there's a large diversity of it, but also there is between countries that are weakly linked, and there's a need for further harmonization and what is sometimes called the deepening of the system. Then we move to the regional level. We saw examples from French, from Chile, from Graz, presented by Santiago, and after that, we saw local examples of local approaches in Hull, Strasbourg, etc. And Aidan stressed also looking at the local level and perceptions also of business people that the link with global production networks is also very essential to take into account. This is also stressed by Koska later on in the presentation. Finally, yeah, the nature of employment very much depends on what is happening also in the regular business, apart from the repair shops and the small scale initiatives in this sense. So yes, circular economy needs to be addressed looking with a multi-scalar approach there. Pauline, can I give the second bullet to you? Yes.
Thank you, Walter. Yeah, thank you all for very interesting presentations. Just to reflect a little on the second bullet point here, so we've heard some examples of circular economy activities in different places, and we can see how they vary from place to place. One particular example of that is the difference in the story of Humberside from Aden or Strasbourg from Santiago. So the companies in Strasbourg seem to be more willing to collaborate locally and producing an industrial ecology network in that context. The companies in Humberside were more focused on their international supply chains. Is that a difference between the companies? Well, there may be some of that and some difference between individual people involved, but also difference in the regional and national policies between the UK and France that are steering the behavior of the companies in the respective regions. We also saw, for example, with the social enterprises that Goska was talking about in Hull, these reflect both the need for the activities of the social enterprises in a city like Hull based on its history and perhaps also the 10 recent years of austerity, we might say, and again emphasized by the talk by Heather on the challenges of scaling up of repair services that are again constrained by the national situation. I think that Walter is going to speak to the third bullet point.
Yes, indeed. We need to switch the image. Yes. Yeah, well, so both earlier points, they link to policies, I would say. Circular economy policies are not fully new, of course. They have been developed in the last decade or maybe even decades under other headings. But very important is that we need to organize these policies in a more inclusive way to actually strengthen the just transition perspective. And we have to take into account these multi-scalar implications. And we've seen these calls of inclusion of other key stakeholders representing often the shorter loop R0, the refuse, the reuse, the resell options, and the repairing options, which are often not integrated that well. We heard this in the presentation of Kieran about EPR systems. Santiago stressed this as well in the regional networks that especially the NGOs and the non-incumbent players are very important. And we see that also even when we look beyond the national scale, where Klaustrup is calling for a better role of the informal sector in Nigeria, the repairing and the refurbishment sector in the system there, which sort of echoes also Heather's observations about the repair services and in the local context in the UK and England. So just creating just circular economy policies calls indeed for wider inclusion of societal stakeholders, economic stakeholders, and civil society stakeholders that are actually engaging in these shorter loop value retention options. For the fourth bullet point, the fourth reflection, I give the word again to Pauline Deutz.
Thanks, Walter. So just briefly to touch on our sort of big question of the day, which was about a social transformation coming from the circular economy. I think what we've seen, particularly from this afternoon's talk, that there's not a great deal of evidence of a social transformation happening yet. I think if it is a social transformation that we want, then that will be based on the understanding of social issues and forming the collaborations, the political will and the economic funding to make them happen. This won't happen as kind of a side effect of a policy that has come in its origins from the environmental sphere. And we heard this one about motivations for a circular economy, and it seems like there's a strong motivation for a circular economy, but maybe not quite the motivation in the right place when it comes to what we have heard can be called a circular society. So we can all have fear for the impacts of climate change and feel like that is indeed an urgent thing to do something about. But we need to understand as well, perhaps, the urgency to deal with social inequalities and social justice issues that are equally demanding in their own right. So that would be my conclusion for this session. I don't know, Walter, if you wish to say something else about the last point.
Yes, very shortly. I would actually only add to that by reflecting on the existing institutional systems, the arrangements that have been created in the last decade for circular economy, this social dimension needs to be added in. And I think some of our PhDs have given quite interesting examples of how in the institutional design of specific policies, either in regional networks or in national systems for extended producer responsibility, changes can be made which would make it more inclusive and which then also strengthen the attention for social issues. That's what I would like to add to that only. At this stage, I think we have time for possible questions, clarifications from the audience.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, Jana Bush has been very kindly reviewing the questions in the chat. Do you have a question there that you would like to put?
All right. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you so much for all the presenters and Pauline and Walter for concluding and highlighting the key points of the presentations we heard. I would also like to remind you quickly that there is a YouTube live stream available where the audio and the slide quality is apparently or is supposed to be higher. So we also apologize for any inconvenience. So also we have a couple of questions in the chat, but also if you still want to put in a question now, feel free to do so. So we have a question from Ivan, and I assume it goes to Kieran and Kostiv. So he's asking, you have investigated the practices of multiple enterprises of the light industry, wood, food, textiles, etc. What is about the heavy industry? I don't know how to say that word in English. Metallurgy. I'm sorry.
Metallurgy.
Metallurgy. Thank you, Pauline. Chemical, petrochemical, etc. Where you aim for investigation of particular industry where representatives of the heavy industry hard to reach and communicate. So, Kieran or Kostiv, anyone?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. What would you? This one.
The question says that we've focused on practices of multiple enterprises in what you might call light industry, wood, food and textiles. Why have we not looked so much at the heavy industries, chemicals, petrochemical, metallurgy? Did we try? Were they less forthcoming? I think, Adam, you might be able to say something on that.
Yeah, sure, I can come in if the other guys don't want to. My research was focused mainly in the manufacturing and logistics sector in North Humberside, and basically these were the companies that are firstly located in the region and also showed interest in it. So I was talking to medical sector companies, the ports, the food sector, and manufacturing more widely. But potentially it was different with Kieran and Castle. Mine was in North Humberside, it's quite a heavy industry region, but potentially it's a difference with the other Kieran or Castle.
Well, I would say, sadly, I didn't have a chance at the time during the 4 years of the PhD to look at other industries. Maybe that could be a post-PhD follow-up topic. I only look at plastic waste and electronic items. So maybe Santi.
Yes, well, that's a good speech for looking for a postdoc, Costa. Yes, so just kind of quickly, I did not focus on heavy industry, but there is a lot of relationship between heavy industry and industrial ecology. And this is mostly, you can see it through kind of the reuse of heat. This is happening in multiple scales in different countries, different cities, on how heavy industry we can kind of recycle the heat coming from those big companies and just heat houses, swimming pools, entire cities and things like that. So it is quite kind of linked to the industrial ecology kind of strategies that you can find in the circular economy strategies. And there are different ways in which you can do it. So the heat recycling, it's kind of one that has been growing in demand as well. So cities are kind of looking which kind of heat they want to take from different industries, and but there are many other that you can kind of explore in the chemical sector, for example. And this is something happening in Strasbourg. There are a bunch of groups doing R&D, seeing how they can recycle kind of waste coming from chemical reactions and things in different ways. I'm not a chemist, so I cannot tell you exactly how they do it, but there is definitely something happening on that side. And I would just kind of add just one kind of little thing there, and is that even if we kind of let's say recycle all these waste coming from heavy industry, it's still heavy industry, and the impact is enormous. So we need to think beyond just kind of what do we do with the waste, and start thinking, do we need this industry to be as big and as heavy as it is? So just kind of a quick thing there. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Maybe just continue with Martin. So there's another question for you, addressed to you. So here goes, and I try to this time speak a bit more slowly, that hopefully you'll understand. So why do you think the circular society discourse, which has a long tradition, has not yet permeated into the mainstream CE discourse beyond the failure of imagination? I would expect this to be a problem of challenging the mainstream economic paradigm.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, when the environmental movement rose strongly in the 70s, especially, there were much more radical voices to propose a circularity in various different ways. That's when the metaphor of the circle is also coined by Barry Commoner in the book The Closing Circle, for example. But that's also when The Limits to Growth was published, Steady State Economics was coined, and many other concepts were developed in that time. And essentially, there was, I think, during that time also more of an openness to more radical ways of conceiving circularity. However, we still, I think, are victims of what in the 80s and 90s became the rise of neoliberal thinking. And that proposed a vision whereby we can address environmental problems through technological change alone, which would not require the transformation of our societies on paradigm of external economic growth. So we would be able to decouple environmental degradation from economic growth and thereby continue our way of life and capitalists' system as it is. Now, since the economic crisis of 2008, this way of thinking about ecology and society has thankfully it's become less dominant. So now there are many more voices closer to what we could have seen in the 70s. But I think the neoliberal thinking and the eco-modernist perspective that wants to just transform technological systems without any change to our growth-dependent economic system and to the materialist culture, the consumist culture, the individualist ethos, still is strong and it's still dominant if you look at political discourse, especially in the right, but also I would say in the center and center left. So so I think it clearly there's still need to push from the margins from academia, but in any case, what is certain is that when you look at surveys of people, like what actual people want, or when you do participatory exercises like citizen councils of randomly elected people, you find that citizens are much more radical in their approach to ecology and society than what you see in mainstream discourse. So I think there is now a push, and it's probably going to just we will have a more plural debate, I think, in the future. And I think it is our role as everybody standing here as academics to also push for that as well, because we have a duty to not only science but also society and to transform it in a positive way.
All right, thank you. And I think we have time for one last quick question. And this is a question for Kostif. So is UPR legislation being trialed in any country product stream? In your view, what are the biggest barriers to its implementation?
Good question. Thank you, Jana, for the question, reading out the question. So far, the closest thing to UPR being tried, as far as I know, is in Japan, where they are exporting plastic waste to a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, but what they are doing is also transferring technology, knowledge. They have forming communities, and they have frequent meetings to kind of organize this a bit well, but I don't think this is close to the vision of UPR we envision. But also we have to be aware that Japan has a circular economy policy since 2002, I think, so they've had some time to think over this. Biggest challenge would be political will, maybe going back to Martin's point that we are in a very neoliberal, very unequal, divided society. This dumping of waste has been a big problem since 60s, 70s. So it's just the same kind of problem taking different dimension, different forms now. So kind of system change needs to happen, and political will, wherever that comes from, is lacking. I think that's the biggest issue. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions that have been put into the chat. Of course, we didn't have time to get through all of them. Thank you, Jana, for making a selection, and thank you, panel, for answering them. We've got one more session to come. They have 30-minute, we're having a tea break here. You may each be having whatever kind of break fits in wherever you are. We will see you back for our second panel session in 30 minutes. Thank you.